Hi. Hi. Yep. I'm sure none of you know me, so let me introduce. I'm Irvin. I'm the one who wrote the Malfoy book, which is why I will celebrate this weekend. Absolutely corking to meet you all. This is Sophia. And in addition to writing books, I'm on a Harry Potter podcast. We are two of the hosts on the Three Broomsticks, available everywhere you catch your Harry Potter podcasts. Our website is threebroomstickspod.com with the three spelled out. So the point is, if you're here and you've been enjoying yourself today, you should listen to our podcast and you'll like it. We're about 70 episodes in. So we thought we'd do a deep dive into the canon and into characters, because that's kind of where we live.
Yeah.
And specifically about the theme of generational parallels between, Draco and Harry's generation and the preceding generations. And of course, we're going to be focusing specifically on Draco Malfoy and the parallels between him and the members of the Marauder generation. The actions they took, the friendship dynamics between them, all of that. I've long believed that part of this whole generational parallel, not for Draco, but overall, is showing that Harry's generation more or less did better than the Marauders in many respects.
Yeah, and I would add on to that, I think having these two different generations, we get to see how the war affected both of these generations, which allows us to also see intergenerational trauma, things being passed on from one generation to, I have a quiet word, so, intergenerational trauma. So, getting to see things that the first generation experienced due to the war, due to pure blood supremacy, that have been passed on to this next generation, and how that is handled. Yeah.
So yeah, we're kind of going to go character by character and see what the parallels, are between them. So I think the obvious choice when thinking about who's Draco's counterpart in the previous generation would seem to be Severus Snape. Largely because of the Slytherin thing. So we're going to go with the easy stuff and then get into the weeds. Snape and Draco, the obvious parallels are that they are furiously jealous of their rival's success on the Gryffindor Quidditch team. I believe it was Sirius who said that, Snape was always jealous of, James's talent on the Quidditch pitch. And I think we can safely say that Draco is exceedingly jealous of Harry, especially Harry on the Quidditch pitch, because in Draco's mind, he thought he was hot shit at Quidditch, but then who becomes the youngest seeker in a century?
Yeah. And Irvin pointed out, Draco can actually do something about his jealousy. He has this, he is on the team, mainly because of his dad, but he's able to actually compete head-to-head with Harry in that space, whereas Snape doesn't have that. But I would say Draco's actually worse off for being able to compete in the same arena as Harry than Snape is with James. Because I think what we see with Snape and James is that Snape is able to take this idea of, that's just not my area of interest. That's not the space I'm putting my energy into. I am the really good potion maker. I'm the person who knows all about the dark arts. I'm smarter than James, at least in his eyes.
Right. He's good at Quidditch and you're into that.
Yeah, exactly. He's the dumb jock. And so I think it allows for Snape, even if he is jealous, to be more jealous of, why does everyone else care that James is so good at Quidditch? Sort of jealous of the attention James gets rather than jealous of his abilities so much. Whereas with Draco, they're competing in the same arena, so he is just directly comparing himself in the place he values and finds himself wanting.
Yeah. Now imagine if Harry were also good at musical theater, and then Draco would be competing in both their passions.
That would be, I would be so happy to read that series.
Yeah. It could mean danger.
Exactly. And we also see, Snape really does not get over his jealousy of
Snape Well, and I would argue most of the Marauder generation who lives past 21 doesn't get over anything ever.
So he really just like feeds into Draco's competition as well, in sort of favoring the Slytherin Quidditch team, trying to like make it harder for Harry to play Quidditch. So yeah, that sort of is passed down between the generations, that hatred of the Potters and their Quidditch abilities.
Yes. Now, getting into sort of more specific events, both Draco and Snape, when they are humiliated in front of, their peers and the student body, they call a very clever Gryffindor girl a mudblood. Basically, Snape does this with Lily in Snape's Worst Memory. Draco does this with Hermione in Chamber of Secrets, precisely because she humiliates him. She hits him where it hurts, where she's like, no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in. And so Draco lashes out. Now, I would argue, and I do in my book extensively, that both learn their lessons on the topic eventually. Snape learns his lesson through immediate consequences. When Snape calls Lily a mudblood, there is immediate blowback that, basically ruins his life. And so we see that 20 years later, Snape has learned this lesson, because in The Prince's Tale, when Phineas Nigellus's portrait is like, oh, I heard that mudblood Granger talking, Snape is like, don't use that word. And that is at, the 11th hour of the Potter series. Every word that is in The Prince's Tale is there for a reason, because Rowling is trying to tell us something. So I would argue that is her letting us know that Snape did learn on this topic. Draco, on the other hand, him learning his lesson is much less explicit. Initially, he learns the entirely wrong lesson from this. He calls Hermione a mudblood, and basically the Slytherins close ranks around him. And then Ron tries to, hex, ends up burping up slugs. So it works out for Draco. So we see Draco doing this again and again. Not just when he's cornered, but for effect. Think when the writing on the wall appears and he's like, you'll be next, mudbloods. So Draco's like, oh, this is a good thing. I can use this. Draco learns his lesson in the lightning-struck tower. I'm obsessed with this chapter. So Dumbledore makes two requests of Draco atop the lightning-struck tower. The first is come over to the right side, which, in opposition to what the LLM said, I would argue Draco would have, eventually. I think he was lowering his wand, and I think he had been pretty much convinced. But then the Death Eaters show up, and he wasn't in a position to do so. The other request that Dumbledore makes atop the lightning-struck tower is, do not use that offensive word in front of me. I would argue that Dumbledore's offer of mercy to Draco really stuck with him. It took Draco a while to understand, because mercy is just not a concept his family trades in. But once he grasped what was being offered, I think he had a lot of respect for Dumbledore after his death. So the amazing thing is I read Deathly Hallows with a fine-toothed comb, and then Control-F to make sure. When Voldemort is ascendant, and basically anyone and everyone can use the word mudblood with impunity because it becomes societally acceptable, Draco never once in Deathly Hallows uses the word mudblood. I believe that that is Draco's one tiny tribute to Dumbledore. That is the one thing he can do to honor the man who would have saved him. So, took a while, but Draco also learned his lesson on the topic.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love that analysis. I think what's interesting is to think about, you talk about public humiliation, and there's a potential moment where the public humiliation for Draco could have continued. As in, so he's been humiliated by Hermione, he says mudblood. If Ron's spell had worked, and he's barfing up slugs in front of everyone, and all of the Gryffindor Quidditch team is making fun of him, I do wonder if that would have had some effect. Not in terms of him thinking about the meaning of the word and why it was bad, but more just, if I say this, I might be attacked, and it might be really embarrassing.
Right.
So, yeah, I wonder if things would have gone differently if the scenario had been...
Right. Instead, he associates the word with his housemates defending him, and the Gryffindor suffering.
Laughing at Ron. It's like Ron becomes the butt of the joke. It's Hermione and Ron who get humiliated.
Yeah. So, if we're talking about Draco and Snape, the most clear parallel across the generations is actually Draco and Harry versus Snape and James. And Dumbledore explicitly calls this out in the very first book. When, Harry's asking him about Snape and his father in Sorcerer's Stone, Dumbledore says, well, they did rather detest each other, not unlike yourself and Mr. Malfoy. And so, obviously we're going to talk about, whether Draco is the Snape or the James. And these things are never one-to-one. There are moments when Draco is Snape, there are moments when Draco is James, and so on. But the dynamic between the two, sort of how they relate and how they behave to each other, I believe that is a very clear parallel that we're meant to, that is pointed out to us explicitly, that we're like, oh, we're meant to see this, we're meant to notice this. Now, I think that this is most relevant in terms of saving lives. When Draco and Snape in the preceding generation is nearly killed by the Gryffindors, by a Gryffindor being stupid, thinking of the prank on Snape when he was sent to the Shrieking Shack, and thinking of the Sectum Sempra scene. Dumbledore is the headmaster in charge at the moment, and Dumbledore lets off the Gryffindor with a slap on the wrist. You nearly killed someone, so detention for you. Bad, bad. And, in fact, I'm not the only one to see this parallel. Snape sees the parallel as well. Snape is put in charge of punishing Harry for the Sectum Sempra thing. And what is his detention? His attention is going through a record of all of the Marauders' misdeeds. So Snape is definitely having that top of mind in the moment.
Yeah, I really like that connection with that detention from Snape. And it makes me think of the line Snape says, it must be such a comfort to think that, though they are gone, a record of their great achievements remains. And to me it's clear that Snape then is seeing himself in Draco in this situation, like you were saying. But what I find interesting about that quote is that with the sort of record of great achievements, you might call it, the actual record that gets passed down here that made this happen was Snape's curse. So, Sectum Sempra, that was the record that got passed down over the generations. And it's really, the reason Draco gets injured is because of something cruel that Snape had done in that previous generation for creating this spell. And it really shows how Snape is not taking any responsibility for his role in what happens to Draco, and completely sees Harry as being the aggressor here. There's, he is only seeing Harry and James as a perpetrator of violence, and not seeing himself as someone who also perpetrates violence through creating these spells.
Yeah. And actually, that's a good segue for us to jump ahead in terms of the dynamic between James and Snape versus Harry and Draco. So Draco is very frequently referred to as a bully, because he's being referred to as such by Harry, who, let's be honest, is not an impartial party. But my understanding of the Harry-Draco dynamic is that they are basically equals. They are each giving as good as they get. Draco is usually the aggressor. Draco's usually the one walking down the hallway, being like, yo mama so fat, yo mama so poor.
Mama's dead.
Yeah. You're dead on his journey to the great beyond, and you might see him about someone else's wand, that whole spiel.
Musical theater, yeah.
Yeah. So I view Harry and Draco sort of canonically, with a fair bit of evidence, as an equal rivalry. Draco instigates, but Harry gives as good as he gets. And actually, Draco really dislikes when Harry begins dishing out. You take it, he can't dish it out. James and Snape, it's much harder to get a grasp on whether it was a rivalry of equals or if it was bullying. I think that the fandom, and particularly corners of the fandom who are really fond of Snape, really want to portray it as just, you know, a bully and an innocent victim.
Or not a bully. Or an innocent one.
4 bullies and an innocent victim. We are told fairly firmly in the canon that Snape was not completely innocent. Snape, you know, hits back with violent curses. He leaves gashes on James's cheek. Like, again, they clearly, you know, were rivals. It wasn't just bully victim the way it might be with, like, Draco and Neville. That said, it's also hard to say that it was a rivalry of equals because of the numbers. If James and Snape were equal, James, Sirius, Lupin, and Pettigrew versus Snape were not. So I think we can say that, you know, James was more of a bully than Draco is, at least as regards to Snape and Harry.
Yeah. And I think they're equals in terms of intelligence and skill, which matters, but I think, yes, in terms of numbers, they're not, and also I'd say in terms of popularity, because for Draco, you know, not only does he have Crabbe and Goyle, but he also has, like, the rest of the Slytherins behind him. You know, whenever he says something mean to Harry, they're all laughing. And, like, whenever Harry antagonizes with Draco, the other Gryffindors are there. So I'd say they're kind of fairly equally popular within their own houses.
On average. Harry's popularity kind of goes like this throughout the series.
That
but
is
on
true.
average, I'll agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, that is very true. I'd say on average, like, at least among the people within their house, usually they can, like, count on a core group of the bystanders being on their side, whereas with Snape, we really see, like, people are enjoying watching him suffer, and, like, Lily is really the only person who comes to his aid. You don't get the sense that anyone else is interested in looking out for him.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned this argument, but the big thing to me is always also just, like, wealth, resources, and upbringing. Like, Draco versus Snape, completely different. You know, Draco's got, you know, his wealth and his power that's inherent to him, automatically giving him this kind of more equality and rivalry.
So we're about to get into that in the Draco-James thing. But just to wrap up on the Draco-Snape in the Snape and James versus Harry-Draco thing, saving lives, right? We hear from Dumbledore, very misleadingly, that, you know, Snape hated your father because James saved his life. And Snape viewed James as completely culpable in his life being in danger, and so I don't think he was particularly grateful for it. He says as much. Draco's life is also saved by Harry, twice in one night, at the Battle of Hogwarts. Per trivia, Ron gets to punch him and tell him, that's the second time tonight we've saved your life, you two-faced bastard. And I imagine that Draco, rather like Snape, was not grateful. I think that he probably viewed Harry as, not directly, but indirectly, fairly culpable in this entire mess. You know, Harry is the one who came to Hogwarts and started a war. Like, Harry is the one who always summons Voldemort onto the scene to try to kill him. Like, if it weren't for Harry, Draco would be comfortably doing homework in the common room at this very moment. It's not smart and it's not fair, but my point is that I think the saving lives parallel, where, you know, the Slytherin is saved by the Gryffindor and is exceedingly ungrateful about it, I think that parallel really works.
I am not as convinced. I mean, I think there's definitely a parallel, but I don't think that Draco would feel that Harry was culpable. I mean, the thing is, the only reason Draco's life was in danger at the Battle of Hogwarts was because Draco decided to stay and try to get the wand back from Harry, try to, you know, stop Harry, bring Harry to Voldemort. Like, that's completely his own choice, and I think he regrets it very quickly. I mean, sure, overall, but it's not like Draco's life would be perfect without Harry. I mean, all of the things he went through in Book 6 have nothing to do with Harry, and like, how Voldemort treats his family has nothing to do with Harry. So personally, I think that Draco is very grateful that his life was saved, and doesn't blame Harry for being in danger in the first place. But I think because of that rivalry and hatred, can't fully feel grateful that Harry was the one who saved it. I think he would be happy for his life to be saved by someone else, and it's like, oh,
yeah,
it has to be Harry who does it. Like, how humiliating. Yeah.
Also, to your point, though, you know, Draco's life would be better without Harry in the moment, because Voldemort was abroad. Voldemort was out of the country searching for magical MacGuffins and not torturing the Malfoy family until Harry shows up on his doorstep.
Harry did not do that on purpose.
Again, we're not saying he did it on purpose. We're not saying this is smart or fair. But I think from Draco's perspective, he assigns a lot of blame to Harry indirectly for the mess he's in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue, and using the famous words of Draken from Impossible, you think you're all that, but you're not. Like, probably the idea that, like, this golden kid who thinks he's a hero saved his life. Like, I'm sure he has belief, but it's like, you think you're this, like, perfect, good, angel child that you saved me. And I feel like he would feel so angry because he doesn't feel that this, like,
I think
golden
he'd be utterly,
good.
utterly infuriated to owe his life to Harry Potter of all people.
Yeah.
Yes.
How much blame do you think he puts on Lucius about his situation with Voldemort in the house and stuff?
I hope
Quite a chunk.
So, like,
Quite
not
a
completely
chunk.
Harry's fault.
Yeah.
You know, there is so much blame to go around. Draco is willing to assign it here, there, everywhere but the mirror.
For the daddy issues.
Yeah.
It takes him a while, though, to assign that blame. Like,
It does.
the shift from my father's going to hear about this to, like, oh shit, my dad's not the...
Yeah.
I think only after the Battle of Hogwarts does he really reckon that.
I would say he's getting there by Malfoy Manor. Because by Malfoy Manor, he looks to Narcissa rather than Lucius.
But I think there's still a sort of Malfoy family has to stick together. You know, he's not going, like, you know, I think maybe after the battle.
There's going to be no, like, recriminations or anything until after the war.
Yeah.
So, that's Draco and Snape. Now we turn to Draco and James. And Ella, as you said, they're most similar in their background. They are both the spoiled brats and only sons of a wealthy pureblood family. So societally, I would say Draco is very much the James of his generation. And we even see an explicit parallel in how gung-ho they are about, like, their family's Hogwarts houses. When we see James aboard the Hogwarts Express in Prince's Tale, he wants to be Gryffindor like his dad. And Draco, from the first scene we see him in, is like, well, I want to be Slytherin like my whole family. There's literally the exact same quote that they both say about disparaging other houses in the first chronological scene we meet them in, where James, in the Prince's Tale, is like, who wants to be in Slytherin? I think I'd leave, wouldn't you? And Draco and Madame Malkin is like, imagine being in Hufflepuff. I think I'd leave, wouldn't you?
Oh my god.
Same exact wording.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. The other, but the key difference between Draco and James, and I think sort of the reason, they took different paths as they matured, is the question of who they associate with. Where James chose to associate with equals, Draco only wants to associate with subordinates. James immediately seeks out a friend he thinks of as an equal, making for someone who can, at least occasionally, call him out on his shit. And we see that Sirius Black does serve that role. We see it in Snape's worst memory, when James is playing with the snitch, and, Sirius finally says, "Put that away, will you?" James grins. "If it bothers you," he says, stuffing the snitch back in his pocket. Harry had the distinct impression that Sirius was the only one for whom James would have stopped showing off. Draco, on the other hand, and I talked about this on Friday night somewhat, does not want to spend time with his equals. We know from the deleted scene of Draco and Nott talking at Malfoy Manor, that Jo referenced on her website, that we rarely see Draco talking to anybody he considers a real equal. So he doesn't hang out with Nott at Hogwarts. He doesn't even hang out with Zabini. Zabini seems peripheral to his social circle. Rather, Draco hangs out with Crabbe and Goyle, who are in no way his intellectual equals. And we even see that he's used them more as lackeys than as peers, because when Crabbe is tired of polyjuicing himself into a girl, Draco says, look, it's none of your business what I'm doing, Crabbe. You and Goyle just do as you're told and keep a lookout. I can't imagine James saying that to any of the Marauders or treating them like that. And so I think that's why James began maturing and changing and becoming a decent person sort of on his own, whereas Draco needed a very strong traumatic trigger to become a decent person.
And I think, not only does James associate with people he considers his equals, but he also, not only does he associate with people he considers his equals, but he also shows deference to them as well. Like, he sometimes treats his friends' opinions sort of above his own, because he seems serious. That he, they don't even antagonize. He's just like, oh, Sirius wants me to stop showing off. He probably knows what he's talking about, And we at least hear about Lupin sometimes trying to exert some sort of control and like...
A moderating influence.
Moderating influence, and that they, take that and roll with it. So clearly James is willing to see other people's opinions as, maybe, their judgments as better than his own in certain circumstances.
Well, and we can see that because James takes Sirius's advice about secret keepers. Sirius says that I'm the one who convinced James to switch to Peter.
Yeah.
And James did.
Yeah.
I mean, that one didn't really work out for him.
But yeah, he takes the advice of his friends, so sort of cumulatively, all of his friends, their maturity sort of, grows each other's maturity through them listening to each other.
Yeah, because I think a large part of maturing is, learning that you're not always right, it shouldn't always be the exact way that you want it.
Yeah.
And yeah, Draco doesn't really have that until it's Voldemort telling him that it's not going to be the way he wants.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the James and Snape of it all. If you guys don't have any comments, questions, we can move on to other characters. Yeah.
Just to be pedantic, because that's what we're here.
We love that.
When you mentioned, I remember Lupin in the Shrieking Shack saying that he thought it was the Quidditch thing that made Snape jealous. There's a serious line, I'm forgetting it, and I would like to be thinking.
Well, it's that thing that James is telling us.
Right.
Yeah, but they don't know about the Lily situation.
No.
Yeah.
You were just saying, it was earlier attributed to Sirius, but it was really pathetic.
Oh yes.
That's
the serious line I was forgetting.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yes, stipulated. Okay, so, yeah.
This is maybe not directly from canon, more just implied, but I think their family upbringing also has a lot to do with it, because the ethos of the Malfoy family and how Draco has been brought up definitely seems to be that he's taught to believe that he is superior and above others, whereas in the Potter family, obviously we don't have very much to go on how they're raised, but it definitely seems more like they have an ethos of equality and listening to other people, and so that I think would have been taught from childhood and would have led them to be led, as you said, James, to mature faster and learn those lessons.
I think that's definitely implied.
Implied. I don't think we have evidence for that, but that makes a lot of sense.
I definitely agree with you. I
It would
think
be tough
family
to imagine that the Potter family would be actually into
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, I think part of kind of going with that, one of the reasons, again, they don't say this in the text, but if Draco believes he is better than the others, and he doesn't associate himself with Nott and Blaze kind of all the time, he picks lowers, do you think it's because he feels like if he did spend that time, maybe they'd prove that wrong? That maybe they would seem like they're better? And he figures if he has people under him, there's no comparison.
I think there almost necessarily has to be some level of insecurity in there, even if it's on a very subconscious level. I think that he has been raised in his family as really you are the best of the best, and I think there is I would imagine a feeling of anything that threatens the idea that I'm the best of the best, not just I think even the idea of equals with other people, best of the best. So I think there has to be some sort of insecurity of, if I spend time with people who are even at the same level as me, not even to mention better, then I'm no longer the best of the best. And what does that mean?
Yeah, whereas I think it might not even be like a conscious thing. I think he just
Definitely not.
feels comfortable with lackeys and underlings, and so he seeks that out.
I think that's true as well. I think there are lots of layers there. Yeah.
So when you were talking earlier about Harry saving Draco's life, that's from the Fiendfire, right?
From the Fiendfire and then from the Death Eaters in the Battle of Hogwarts.
Oh, yeah, okay. So I was thinking about the first one. I mean, talking about the first one, well, I think part of that is also that, so what does Draco do? So they're trying to get they go to the room of requirement to try to get the diadem, right?
Yes.
And when you get it, destroy it. And Draco and Crabbe and Goyle come in order to thwart them. Essentially, I'm not even sure, maybe just because it's what Harry's trying to do, and they're just trying to thwart whatever, or are they specifically trying to aid
Draco is
Lord?
trying to get Harry and bring him to Voldemort.
Okay.
Like, that is Draco's gambit to get the Dark Lord's favor and get him off his back.
So I think that being saved is partly also, it's just very humiliating because they went in as this thing, like look, we've done this whole thing to fight again. Who is it? I don't know if it's Crabbe or Goyle who sets off. So Crabbe sets off Fiendfire, and then the whole thing backfires on them, and then they have to be saved from the same enemy they were attacking. You know what I mean? It's
absolutely.
To me, that's what makes it especially humiliating. And it's not just that something that he was in danger and Harry saved his life. It's that he had this whole plan, this brilliant plan to get Harry, and then that backfired, and Harry had to say,
He's trying to be the villain, and he ends up being
the victim.
Right, he ends up exactly being like a sort of helpless. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so we can actually transition to Regulus Black, Draco's first cousin once removed, and we actually see a lot of parallels. And I think that's partly because Jo Rowling didn't have very much time to build up who Regulus is in Deathly Hallows, so she's like, look at the way he's like Draco so you can understand him. So, for example, we see how gung-ho they are about Slytherin. It's all Draco can talk about in his first scene, right? He's like, oh, my family's in Slytherin, I want to be in Slytherin, we've always been in Slytherin. And when Harry ends up in Regulus's room, it says, the Slytherin colors of emerald and silver were everywhere, draping the bed, the walls, and the windows. And it's like, wow, guy, wow. Yeah. They are also the youngest confirmed Death Eaters we know. They are the only two we know that joined at 16 years old. I mean, as I'm working on my Death Eater book, I think a lot of them joined fairly young, but those are the only two we know joined at 16. And that's because Creature tells us that when he was 16 years old, Master Regulus joined. And so, again, that
says to Snape, like, y'all can't wait when you're out of school to join the Death Eaters.
Yeah.
16, like...
Yeah, because I would argue that Snape, Crouch, probably Avery, that whole crew joined probably right out of Hogwarts, but 16 I think is unusual. And so they joined the Death Eaters after long aspiring to do so, right? Only then to be completely horrified when the Dark Lord's wrath turns to someone they care about. I think sort of the parallel between Regulus having his, come to Merlin moment through Creature versus Draco having his when it's his family that's in danger, I think that is clearly meant to be a parallel to help us understand Regulus.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we just talked about how Draco doesn't associate with equals, but he also doesn't have any, I guess, friends or positive associations with people who are of a lesser social status than he is. And I think this is where Regulus has this moment of growth, is that he actually really loves and cares for Creature and sees what happens to Creature. And I think both of them, they both have their moments of seeing someone they care about being affected by Voldemort. But in one case, we have, Voldemort is punishing the Malfoys because the Malfoys are not doing a good job of carrying out his plans. So the solution to that is then we have to do better at serving Voldemort. We have to be able to fulfill all his plans so we get back in his good graces. But in Regulus's case, someone I love is in danger because of just the very nature of Voldemort's plans, which are wizarding and pureblood supremacy. So the very nature of those plans means that house elves are going to be in danger. So for Regulus, it becomes more of an ideological shift of, if I serve Voldemort, then these are the sorts of things that Voldemort would do. And I think that allows him to have much more of a significant growth moment there.
Oh, I disagree.
Yeah?
I don't think Regulus's switch is ideological. I think it's also personal.
I
don't
it's
think
also personal, sure.
Yeah, like, I don't think he's as perturbed by house elves in general being threatened. I think he's perturbed by his specific house elf being hurt. Like, I think if Voldemort had taken any other house elf, if, like, Winky or Dobby was taken to the cave, I don't think Regulus would have, would have seen the light quite as quickly and immediately as he did.
No, I know that. I'm saying it is his specific house elf, but he must have had an ideological shift to go from, because nothing actually, really, like, Creature survives. I mean, not to say that nothing happens to him, but Creature survives. And so it's not, I would not say it's just a revenge plot to, like, Regulus literally sacrifices his life to try to take down Voldemort. That's not, I don't think that's a revenge situation. I would say that that's I have changed and now want, because he's just saying, he knows that he can't, that even through sacrificing his life, he is not going to defeat Voldemort. So it's a long-term plan. He's hoping somebody else defeats Voldemort. So I would say it has to be a deep ideological shift, or else, you wouldn't, that's not a strategy that someone does just out of revenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's the personal becomes the, precipitates the ideological shift. If it happened to Winky or Dobby, he wouldn't care, but because it happened to the only creature in the world that he really truly cares about, and he sees the effects in person in a way that is deeply personal, it precipitates a change that becomes something worth laying down his life for.
Yeah, because then he can see, oh, Voldemort doesn't see Creature as human or worth caring about, and then he can notice, wait, that's wrong. Like, I care about Creature. I think that Creature, is worth caring about. So Voldemort is wrong. If he's able to take that shift.
Well, and also I think it's a, like, no one is safe thing. I think it's the fact that Voldemort would target his house. And he's like, well, if he targets my house elf, like, could he target my family? Like, I think, it's the person becoming the political, but, if Voldemort is only targeting others, then it's fine. But if he targets you and yours, then it's like, oh, wait, we don't want that. If he's the person to do that, maybe he is wrong.
Yeah.
So that's the maybe he's wrong, the after. But the before, so what was the attraction to Voldemort in the first place? I mean, I know it's sort of a general question. I have some, one of the things is that wizards can then come out of hiding and sort of assume their rightful position as rulers, since they have these magical powers.
Yeah.
I mean, is it more, do you have any about Regulus specifically?
They're from the same extended family. I think they were raised in the noble and ancient House of Black with Toujours Pur and the Black family tree hanging on the wall. I mean, like, Draco was raised in Malfoy Manor, but, like, the same thing. I think they were both raised to believe that, mudbloods are inferior, that, like, purebloods should take their rightful place. All the crap that Draco starts spouting off in Madame Malkin's, like, I don't think they should let the others sort in. I think Regulus was raised the exact same way, with the exact same prejudices. And, again, Voldemort, promised to do that. I forget who it was who said it. I think it might be Sirius, so will correct me. Where it's like, they thought, lots of people thought the Dark Lord had the right idea until they saw what he was willing to do.
So that's what I want to talk about maybe a little more. I mean, I'm not sure what more to say about it, but that's, thought the Dark Lord, right? Because when you talk about it, you sort of make sure that no one thinks you sympathize with the Dark Lord, so you're like, and then he said this terrible bigoted thing, but I think that there is an appeal there because the wizards can come out of hiding, and I think that's part of the original initial appeal. Then they find out that he's, that he just attacked, that what this actually means,
But that's not part of Voldemort's plan.
Isn't it?
No.
Isn't that one of the things that's said?
That's Grindelwald. Grindelwald
Well,
wants
it's true,
the
Grindelwald's
wizards out of
like-
hiding.
Yeah.
Voldemort wants purebloods at the top of the secret Wizarding Society, and Muggleborns either in their rightful
Oh, that's
place
true. It's
or
more of a
excluded.
Grindelwald thing. That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I would say we also have explicitly said how proud Regulus's parents were of him for joining the Death Eaters, and I think that that could be a big motivation at 16, especially when your older brother has, you know,
Right, he's
run
rebelling
away.
against the rebellion.
Yeah.
Oh, against
the older
Sirius,
brother has run
exactly.
away. The parents are devastated. You know, they like Regulus is their only hope for having a good son, and so that he is like, okay, I'm gonna prove.
Oh, were
to
there
them
just
that
two
I am
brothers? I
Yeah,
didn't
it's just the
remember
two of
that.
them.
Oh, I see, okay.
So yeah, and I think that that connects to some of the things we were talking about here. If you want to move on to that.
Yeah.
But,
So yeah, like,
Okay.
you know, Regulus and Draco, I think, come from a very similar background to the Dark Lord service. They have a very similar, you know, awakening when it's like, oh wait, the Dark Lord can hurt people or elves I care about. The difference between the two is that Regulus had the guts to do something about it. Regulus, you know, in a distinctly un-Slytherin move, I would say, chooses to sacrifice himself for a cause.
Right.
Draco is, again, as I discussed on Friday, an exemplary Slytherin. He is textbook self-preservation all the way. And so I think that is the key difference between Regulus and Draco.
Yeah, what Regulus says, that's a big deal. I mean, it's like, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he really turns. That's the thing. Which is
Yeah.
what you were saying. What
Yeah.
Sophia was saying.
And I think it's interesting because we see with both Regulus and with Draco, there's taking care of the family. So in Draco's case, it's both self-preservation but also trying to care for his parents. And we see Regulus do the same thing. Regulus, you know, he doesn't tell anyone in his family that he has left the Death Eaters or anything about what he's planning to do because he doesn't want them to be targeted in any way. But I think in Draco's case, he is in a more challenging position. I think no matter what, Draco would never do what Regulus
No.
did. So just putting that out there. But I think that also Draco's in a challenging position where taking care of his family, you know, for Regulus, his family really has nothing to do with the Death Eaters. They're a pure blood family. They like the Death Eaters, but they're not Death Eaters. Whereas Draco's parents are Death Eaters. So anything that Draco does directly influences how his parents are going to be treated, whether his parents are safe. So I think that makes it a lot harder for Draco to change sides, because I think if it was just him, he would be a lot more likely to change sides, you know, end of Catholic Prince, beginning of Deathly Hallows. Like, I can imagine that happening, but because his parents are involved, he knows, like, he can't leave the Death Eaters on his own. You know, he can't leave because his parents will kill him. And
which
so,
Dumbledore spells out in his offer. He's like, you know, we'll protect your mother, we'll
Exactly.
send someone to protect Lucius, so yes.
yes, and then once Dumbledore is gone, it's hard for Draco to do that.
And I would also point out that with Draco, the threat is explicit.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of resisting Voldemort is about, like, the implied threat of violence. But, like, Voldemort straight up tells Draco in small words that, like, I will kill your family.
Yeah.
See,
I think it's also easier for Regulus to switch than Draco because Voldemort's literally living in his house.
Yeah.
Like, it's under his eyes directly.
Yeah.
So, like, there's no way to hide if he's changing sides.
And the sense I got is that Regulus has basically no role in the Death Eaters. Like, he is very much like a minor recruit. Like, he is not that important, whereas Draco is much more front and center because his parents are so front and center in Voldemort's eyes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should maybe, you know, we're slightly running out of time. Should we move on to...
Yeah. So we can connect Draco to both James and Regulus, which we've done one-on-one. But what brings all three of them together is that they are among the fairly unusual subset of characters who actually matured and changed from who they were as a teenager. I said at the outset that most of the Marauder generation is frozen at 16. Sirius, Lupin, Snape, they really never mature past that. Whereas we, know canonically that James, Regulus, and Draco changed from who they were at 16. They changed their views, they changed their character, they, changed who they are. And Dumbledore is the fourth character in that exclusive category. But what's interesting about that is that unlike Regulus and James, Draco gets to live with it. Like, they all see the error of their ways, they all, change and become decent people, but Draco then has the time to mature, potentially to make amends. He and Harry learn to be civilized adults by the epilogue, whereas I can't picture James and Snape, ever being civilized adults about anything, however many decades go by.
Yeah, and I think part of that has to do with the jealousy angle with Lily in the mix of the James and Snape, that, if James and Lily had survived, then, like, Snape would constantly be reminded of that jealousy. Whereas I think that for Harry and Draco, a lot of the things that were causing all of that rivalry, like, can kind of just be in the past after they move past.
Right. Once they're no longer playing Quidditch against each other.
Once the pureblood thing is kind of
they're not trying to get house points anymore.
Yeah. So it's more like, okay, that was our
once there's no more Voldemort.
Yeah. Once there's no more Voldemort, I think. Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that a bigger source of their rivalry was actually Hogwarts than Voldemort.
Right. No, I agree too.
Yeah. But yeah. So, the last parallel that we want to go over is actually Draco and Sirius Black. And the main echo for the two of them is Prisoner of Azkaban and the prank. I argue that, the prank that, that Sirius pulled on Snape when they were teenagers to try to get Snape to see Lupin as a werewolf is pretty fundamental in the whole mythos of Snape and the Marauders, and Draco is 100% the Sirius parallel there. So first, early on in Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius and Draco try to bait Snape and Harry into approaching someone or something deadly and dangerous. Sirius is like, oh yeah, like, go that way, sending Snape to meet a werewolf. Draco is goading Harry to be like, yeah, you should go hunt down Sirius Black yourself, the, notorious mass murderer. And again, the setting is what drives home the parallel. When Draco is doing this and trying to convince Harry to, go after Sirius, they're in Snape's potions class. So it always comes back. And ironically, Harry doesn't take the bait, unlike Snape, because he has Ron and Hermione, and cooler heads prevail. But he does then end up, just like Snape, taking the tunnel under the Whomping Willow to the Shrieking Shack because of Sirius Black. Yeah. But following up, Draco then does try to pull a prank on his rival that could result in deadly consequences, or at least serious injury, which is the fake Dementor at the Quidditch match. Judging by the Gryffindor's reactions, who are just like, I thought he was dead for sure, like, falling from that height is considered deadly, even for wizards who are bouncier than the average muggle. So I would argue that that is also meant to be a parallel, that, Draco, just like Sirius, is, trying to get Harry hurt, and probably not thinking through this because they're 13. I don't think Draco, like, deliberately was like, I want Harry to die. But through his antagonism and through his recklessness, they do place Harry and Snape in a situation where they really could die.
And we have argued about this.
We've argued about this a lot.
Podcast episode, so I'm not going to go into it. I don't agree with how deadly you think the prank is, but I do think that there's a parallel there because we do see with both Draco and Sirius that there's a sort of, I think I would argue probably in both of their cases because of just how young they are, this sort of casual disregard for the safety of someone who they dislike and not really thinking through any of the consequences of what that would look like. So I think there's definitely a parallel. I don't think the severity of the prank is quite as high as this. But we'll move on.
Fair enough. And there's also the way that Sirius and Draco treat house elves. The house elves have been coming up a fair bit today. And so both of them seem to treat house elves somewhere like in the middle of the spectrum between like Lucius's just like straight up mustache twirling villainy of like kicking Dobby down the hall, and like actual decent treatment, you know, thinking the Crouches, thinking Regulus, where the house elves are still enslaved and it's still wrong, but the house elves, you know, like their masters and like think fondly and are treated like decently within the confines of the system. Because Dobby tells Kreacher that, you know, Kreacher should know that Draco Malfoy is not a good master to a house elf. So again, we never see Draco like do anything, you know, truly beyond the pale reprehensible to Dobby, but he and Sirius can both be considered firmly not good masters.
Yeah, I would argue we honestly don't know anything really about Draco's relationship with Dobby. Like, Draco could be just as terrible as Lucius is, and we don't know. But yes, I would say both of them don't treat their house elves very well. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And just to wrap up that parallel is, I've long argued that the Harry Potter books espouse a consequentialist morality, where basically, you know, how we judge your actions is very substantially informed by what the outcome is. And I would say that both Sirius and Draco are the beneficiaries of this. That they both do things that, again, could result in very serious injury to someone. And they're both led off with a, well, you're lucky no one got hurt after the prank and after, basically they're both led off with, you know, you're lucky no one died after the prank and after Draco's unintended victims in Half-Blood Prince. You know, Dumbledore even tells him, you're lucky no one got hurt. And so I'd imagine it'd be a very different outlook for either of them if Katie Bell, Ron Weasley, or Snape had actually died in the pranks.
One final concluding sentence. Is Draco Malfoy better than the preceding generation? I would argue no. However, what I would say is that he is given the grace of getting the time to heal from that generational trauma and from the war that allows him to potentially become a better person than some of the